Welcome to NHL Wraparound Short Shifts. It is Christmas Eve, December 24th, 2024. Vic Morren and Neil Smith with you. Happy holidays, sir.
And the same to you. How are you, and how are your holidays so far? It is Christmas Eve.
So far, so good. So, looking forward to the 3-day break like the players and the teams are. I think we've hammered it pretty hard since opening night. So I'm looking forward to the break as well. But I want to give you a little bit of a stat leading into our show today, because I think a lot of people look at American Thanksgiving as the key point as to whether or not you're going to make the playoffs. But in the last 5 non-COVID seasons, only 20% of teams below the cut line have made the playoffs. And last season, that was only Carolina and Edmonton. So take a good look at the standings this morning, because if your team is below that line, you're probably not getting in.
That's absolutely right. That holds true. It's too hard to make up the points with a 3-point system that the NHL has, because teams keep coming out of games with at least a point all the time. And so to make up ground is really, really difficult if you've had a slow start.
Going to hit probably about a half dozen headliners here. And, now we're really careful on how we balance these shows. I don't think we want to give too much attention to any single topic unless it's warranted. And the fact of the matter is, the New York Rangers remain in a free fall. They are 4-13 in their last 17 games. They are as close to being last in the Eastern Conference as they are to a wild card berth. So I'm going to ask you, are the New York Rangers broken beyond repair this season? They had their feel-good meeting in Dallas. They won against the Stars on Friday night, but in that game, Matt Rempe, an 8-game suspension because of a hit against Miro Heiskanen. And then the weekend was just awful for them. They scored about 17 seconds into the game against Carolina. You're thinking, okay, maybe things are turning. They flatlined the rest of the game, lost to the Hurricanes, and absolutely got wiped out in New Jersey on Monday.
Yeah, in the back-to-back within 48 hours, they had 2 dreadful performances, only getting 1 goal, as you said, and that came 17 seconds into the first of the 6 periods they played over the 48 hours. So New Jersey had their way with them, made them look awful. They scored their penalty kill, which is the one thing everybody was bragging about with the Rangers. No matter how bad they were, they had the best penalty kill in the league. Well, guess what? New Jersey lit them up almost every time they tried in Newark on Monday. So my answer to that is yes, they are broken beyond repair for this season, for sure. I don't see them coming back. Will they make the playoffs? I don't know. They might latch onto the wild card spot, but they are not going to be any kind of threat to anybody this season.
Chris Kreider, healthy scratch on Monday. I mean, the trade freeze ends before their next game, which is going to be played in Tampa Bay on Saturday. I mean, could there be a deal here? Right now, only 3 teams in history have missed the playoffs after winning the President's Trophy, including the Rangers in 1993. But you look at this team. After the break, here are their next 10 games. At Tampa, at Florida, home Boston, at Washington, at Chicago, home Dallas, home Jersey, at Vegas, at Colorado, and at Utah. So if I'm looking at this, I don't see it. Not the way this club is playing. They look like they have mailed it in. They have, I don't know if they've quit on their coach or not, but it certainly looks like whatever message Peter Laviolette and his staff are delivering, nothing's getting through right now. And you can almost see that there is exasperation on all fronts.
I think from the outside, not knowing anything about the inside, but from the outside, it looks to me like they've quit on the management more than they've quit on Laviolette. But this whole thing started, and we talked about it in the summer. This started with the Trouba debacle way back in June when they started to talk to teams about Trouba. They were talking to Detroit. That got public. Then they asked Trouba early for his 15-team no-trade list. Give it to us before July 1st. He said, okay, here it is. But guess what? It includes Detroit. So then they had no deal for Trouba. Then they try to start training camp with the captain having known that he's been shopped around. He's supposed to come in and lead. But everything went pretty well. They were 12-4. A great start, really, if you think about it. And then all of a sudden they lose that game in Edmonton. Then they lose at home to New Jersey. And the place absolutely implodes ever since. And it's been downhill. All of a sudden, Trouba is gone, given away to Anaheim. Capo Caco, the second overall pick in 2019 behind Jack Hughes, is basically banished to Seattle for a defenseman that they'll only have until the end of the regular season in Borgen. So I don't know what's going on, but they are. If there's a panic button anywhere, I'm sure it's being smashed down pretty hard.
Well, they say misery loves company, so I'm going to go close by to the other team in New York. There's actually two other teams in New York. They happened to play each other last night at the UBS Arena. The Buffalo Sabres, their first win in 14 games. They got Rasmus Dahlin back a couple of games ago. 4 assists, a +5 on the night. And, we have said that teams go into losing streaks before they actually start losing because they start to develop bad habits. But I think the opposite can be said in terms of teams actually coming out of slides before they actually win a game. And the Sabres actually played quite well Saturday evening in their loss in Boston. And finally, it all came together for them on Monday.
And it took the New York Islanders to make that all come together for the Sabres because instead of the Islanders carrying on from their last game, which they had played very well, they instead went back to the old Islanders and came out, weren't ready to play, were jumped on by Buffalo, and it just became unwatchable. Certainly for the people in the building, because by the third period, there were a lot of people with their seats had been vacated. It was a horrible game for the Islanders and a great game for the Sabres to put a pounding on somebody finally after all the suffering they've done this year.
Are you surprised Patrick Waugh left Ilya Sorokin in going into the third period? The game was 5-1. I mean, it was 5-0. Islanders scored in the final minute of the second period. Is he thinking, all right, maybe we have a comeback here because our opponent has a 13-game winless streak going, and maybe that's why he left him in?
I can't read his mind, but I would say that probably one would go, okay, it's Buffalo. It's our last game before the break. It's a home game. Sorokin is a world-class goalie. I'll pull him with 11 minutes left in the period as he did. And, I'm going to do everything I can to try to win this game, even though it looks out of reach. But leaving him in, it doesn't completely remind me of something, but it does. And that is, I remember a coach back in the day. His name was Mario Tremblay.
Yep.
And he left his goalie in at home when he was getting smoked by the opposition. I think it was Detroit Red Wings. Yeah. And Mario Tremblay's goalie came out of the net. Yeah. Finally, when he got pulled out of the net, he came out of the net and he went behind the bench and he said to the team president, I will never play for this team ever again. And that person who said that is now the head coach of the New York Islanders, Patrick Waugh. So, I mean, if anybody knows goaltenders, Patrick does, certainly infinitely better than I do. But I was surprised. He could have put the young guy in Hogsburg and let him throw him into the fire and give him some time. He decided not to do that for whatever reason, but a 7-1 score doesn't look good on Sorokin's record.
Another fun item in that game that, Waugh was probably the first coach when he was in Colorado that really started to pull his goaltender early with like 4 and 5 minutes left. And he actually lifted Sorokin with around 10 minutes left in regulation.
11. There was 11 something. 11
was
something.
Was it? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So.
And I mean, here's the thing that I'd like to get at, and maybe we'll get this stat before our next show. And that is, when you pull a goaltender early or late, I guess, but especially early, does anybody ever come back? Does it ever work? Like, do they ever get multiple goals with the goalie pulled and end up winning the game or tying and going into overtime even? Because I've never seen it work.
It happened against the Islanders this year.
It happened again. Oh, yes. Somebody did
right.
that, yeah.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, like, I don't know. I mean, pulling the goalie with a minute or less to go, that rarely works.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So pulling him with 5 minutes to go and down by multiple goals, does that ever work? I don't know. We got to find out.
All right. Well, we will do that. And I believe that we do have the research in place and the tools to actually find that. So I'll put that on the agenda for the Monday Wraparound show. Moving on. Patrick Laine plays for the first time against his former club in Columbus. They had met earlier, but he was still sidelined. He winds up leaving the game after the first period. Upper body injury, took 2 big hits, one from Dmitry Voronkov and the other from Dante Fabro in the first period. But there's a little bit more to this story because prior to the game, Laine had spoken with a writer in the Columbus area, and basically he threw the Blue Jackets under the bus.
He certainly did, and what he said was that they didn't mind, or they something about their losing culture. They had a losing culture, and they didn't bother them to have a losing culture or something like that. And I mean, that's a horrible thing to say about an organization. And, all of a sudden Patrick Laine's the star again in Montreal because he's got these power play goals. But, I mean, you just don't do that. And then you head into Columbus, and then to add insult to injury, you leave after the first period. It looks like you just wussed out and ran out of the building.
Yeah.
He might have been hurt. Who knows? But, I mean, come on. You're in Columbus. This is the one time you should show that you're not the guy that deserved to be traded out of there, that should have been moved out of there. You should have kept me here. You want to prove to them you should have kept me here. And what does he do? He leaves after the first period. No goals, no assists, no nothing. And takes 2 massive hits, as you said, and leaves to go to the bus.
And Zach Werenski was pretty outspoken after the game. I mean, he was pissed. And I think rightfully so, because I think his Columbus teammates befriended him. They helped him any way that they could. And I believe that team felt offended. And it was probably reflected in a couple of those early hits. I mean, the Blue Jackets came out with a chip on their shoulder. Kirill Marchenko wound up winning that game late. So some real sweet revenge for Columbus on this one.
Yeah, and I'm going to bring something up that's not really a happy note on this Christmas Eve, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. This is a different club than before the Johnny Gaudreau tragedy. And Johnny Gaudreau was a great hockey player, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But they have embraced this tragedy and Johnny Gaudreau's loss and become, I think, a much different organization since that happened. I'm here to tell you that I think if the Johnny Gaudreau thing hadn't happened, and I wish it hadn't, but if it hadn't happened, and Patrick Laine got traded, and Patrick Laine said his comment about Columbus would have just been like, oh, well, yeah, oh, well, whatever.
Well,
But I think they take a lot of pride in wearing the Blue Jackets uniform now, and they're playing for Johnny, and they're not going to let you say that about Johnny's organization. And that may not all be on a conscious level, but I think on a subconscious level, that's what's going on there. Because I've seen and heard things out of Blue Jackets this year that I'd never seen or heard before.
Another organization that's been a little bit of flux has been the Vancouver Canucks. And supposedly a second reported rift between JT Miller and Elias Pettersson, and it was Captain Quinn Hughes and Rick Tocchet to address it first, and then both players did. They're playing it down, but is this one of these things where there's smoke, there's fire?
Oh, I'm sure there is. Do you remember a number of years ago when it was Erik Karlsson and somebody else on the Ottawa Senators? The wives weren't getting along, or there was things that were said, and it ended up that the player on Ottawa got traded, not Karlsson, but the other player, to get them apart because they just couldn't get along. You know, when you see these things, where there's smoke, there is fire. But Rick Tocchet, first and foremost, is a great team player, right? He's a great team guy. Yeah. He played for some really good teams. Everybody loved him as a teammate. You know, after all, he was on TNT because Gretz loved him so much, and Gretz got him onto TNT. And then TNT might have been his foray right back into coaching again. But he would be able to know what's going on with Miller and Peterson, and he should take care of it. He should get the guys in. He should take them out for a beer. He should do whatever he has to do to get them to settle down. The other thing I want to say to you, Vic, is, and I'm not going to guess at what I mean by this, I'm just going to say, does JT Miller's absence from the team for those number of games where he took personal leave have anything to do with this rift with him and Peterson? I'm not saying it does. I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm just saying it's something to think about. The guy goes on a 10-game personal leave and then comes back, and one of the first things we hear is how him and Peterson don't get along and they've got a rift. I mean, it sounds coincidental.
Well, both players were struggling coming out of Miller's return. So in the first 6 games, they were combined 4 assists and a -7. And all 4 of those assists were Miller. Pettersson had nothing. But last night, he scores 2 goals. And Miller assists on the second one. Pettersson wound up leaving the game with an injury after the second period, so he didn't get to come out and take a bow for being the first star. Again, I think I think this is a really strong team, and I think that this team is going to continue to grow. I mean, I picked them as the Stanley Cup winner at the start of the year, so we'll see where I am about 6 months from now on this. And just before we move on, Mike Hoffman was the player that you were referencing with the referee, right. Erik Karlsson. So, right. Had to go and look that up while you were speaking there. So,
good thing I'm long-winded.
Well, that's what I was counting on there. So I think you saw me look down. A couple of other significant injuries to talk about, and we'll have more injury news a bit later on also. But David Pastrnak left Monday's win over Washington in the second period with an upper body injury. And Ottawa goalie Linus Ullmark left Sunday's game in Edmonton with an upper body injury. Supposedly his back was just tightening up. Levi Merilainen, who got his first win in Vancouver the night before, actually came in relief, played well, but the 6-game win streak for the Senators was snapped. Anton Forsberg was still out. So that's a pretty significant news coming out of Ottawa, and hopefully this break will help get at least one of their top 2 goaltenders back before we resume play again this weekend.
Well, let's hope for Ullmark it is just tightening of the back, because that's something that can be remedied, rather than something pulled or something strained or something certainly broken. But Ottawa's on a good little run here. They're clawing and scratching at trying to get into the playoffs and get somebody else out. Just a comment on the Boston Bruins.
Yep.
I think I'm wrong about what I said the other day, which was that I thought Boston would not make the playoffs. That's how badly they were playing. I think that Joe Sacco has got the Boston Bruins playing well. I mean, I'm impressed by the win over Washington. Washington's a tough team to play against, and they were able to do that and show a lot of grit and get a gritty win over a really good team of the Washington Capitals. So we'll see after the Christmas break, but they're playing way better than they were at the beginning of the season when Jim Montgomery was still there. And I don't think it was Jim Montgomery's fault that they were playing that way. I think when you don't have a training camp for your number one goalie who holds out to get all the money that he got, that's part of it. Swayman is playing better now. The whole team is playing better. And I do think that they're now a playoff team and almost – they're not the Boston Bruins that we remember of last year, but they're not as bad, certainly, as they started the season.
No, and, just their two late wins against Buffalo and Washington leading into the break, that's kind of more in line with what we've expected from that club. So, a great thing about what we do on the show that we're not right 100% of the time, and we actually admit it. So,
unlike many others out there.
That's right. But we're humble enough to say, hey, you know what? We don't bet 1,000 here. Hey, a couple other notes from last night, actually a few of them. And I'm going to start off with the Tampa, Florida game because whose ever idea was it to play these two teams back to back ahead into the break? Boy. So the road team wins both of these games, 4-0 shutout last night for Johansson, and Nikita Kucherov, leg on leg with Matt Tkachuk. Fortunately, he was able to come out, and then Esamont with a low bridge on Greer, and Greer was able to come back. But this game was a whole lot of nasty, 63 penalty minutes in total. And just, the kind of thing you want to go in with good cheer on the Christmas break.
Well, I think that, looking from the outside, not being in their locker room, but I think that Tampa was probably saying, look, they've got this pack mentality in Florida. They pride themselves on it. They got all the way through and won the cup last year with that. We're sort of more of a skilled team, high end, high octane. We're going to have to get down to their level and play nasty like they do, and then also have our skill to back it up to win. And that's what I saw out of Tampa. Tampa tried to play a Florida game and actually did very well at it. And the game the night before that was in Tampa, had it not been for a power play breakdown that saw Florida score 2 shorthanded goals, Tampa might have won back-to-back games in this series back and forth. So that's going to be a real good rivalry coming down the rest of the season between these two teams. Two extremely strong teams in the state of Florida. Who'd have ever thunk it, right? That Florida would have these two really strong teams.
Conversely, another two clubs that have had a history of nastiness in their rivalry, Penguins and the Flyers. So they met on Monday. Sidney Crosby, 4-point night against the Flyers. His 1,033rd assist tied Mario Lemieux for the most in franchise history. But here's an interesting little nugget. These two teams have played 312 times in the regular season, and it was the first time ever that the Penguins played a penalty-free game against the Flyers. The Flyers did take 3 minors in that game, but a clean sheet for the Penguins.
Yeah, and you think about this rivalry going all the way back to 1967-68, the first year these two teams were in the league, and and how long this has been going on for these cross-state rivals, because as we all know that live on the East Coast, Pittsburgh is nowhere near Philadelphia. In fact, the New Jersey Devils are closer to Philadelphia than the Pittsburgh Penguins, I think. But anyway, it's a long rivalry and a good one, and two teams who still have the same name they were born with, the Philadelphia Flyers and the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Yeah, I think the Rangers, Islanders, Devils, Capitals are all closer to Philadelphia than Pittsburgh. So you check on my geography later. Also on Monday, Dylan Holloway, first career hat trick. Blues win 4-0 over Detroit. Macklin Celebrini in that game in Vancouver. He's from North Vancouver. He returned home for the first time, had 2 assists in the Sharks' loss in Vancouver. Don't look now, but Nashville 4-1-1 in their last 6. But boy, that chasm is just so deep. And despite, some improvement in their play, still 11 points out of a playoff spot. And I think one team that we don't mention enough, Neil, the Vegas Golden Knights. They're 8-1 in their last 9 and have the fewest regulation losses in the league with 8.
Yeah, amazing. And we don't think about them enough. Maybe because, they won the Stanley Cup only a couple of years ago, and then they went through some tough injuries last year, and a lot of people saw them falling down again this year because they had thrown so much into the here and now and not kept their building blocks for the future. They're known to trade first-round picks at the drop of a hat. They draft guys, and rarely do those first-round picks ever end up on the team because they're already traded. But the Vegas Golden Knights, as you said, 8-1 in their last 9, best record in the NHL at the break. That's really something.
Coming out of that game in Vegas, also, John Gibson and Brock McGinn left those games with injuries. Gibson took a stick through his mask, looked to get him around the eye area, and McGinn suffered an apparent leg injury. Also, Auston Matthews re-aggravated his injury against Buffalo on Friday. He missed Saturday's game against the Islanders and Monday's game against Winnipeg, both losses. Cole Smith, a forward for Nashville, out 4 to 6 weeks with a lower body injury. And on the return side, Anthony Duclair came back Saturday for the New York Islanders in Toronto after missing 28 games with a lower body injury. He has played now 2 games, including the one against Buffalo on Monday, and has assists in both of those games. So, with the holiday upon us, Neil, it's a good time for us to give either a little holiday cheer or play the role of Scrooge. We're not going to do what I think a lot of folks do, and, we're going to give gifts to different teams and wishing good health, and we're going to wish the Buffalo Sabres a win, and, of course, they wound up getting that last night anyway. But we're going to throw 3 questions apiece back and forth and take whichever side of this coin that you like. So I will ask the first question. Is the 3-day break the only thing saving Derek Lalonde in Detroit and Peter Laviolette in New York their current positions behind their respective benches?
It might be the only thing saving Derek Lalonde. I'm not sure about Peter Laviolette because there are so many people that should be in trouble in New York for what's going on there. Derek Lalonde is Steve Yzerman's pick. Steve Yzerman, of course, is the general manager of Detroit. Derek Lalonde and Steve worked together with Tampa Bay Lightning when Derek Lalonde was the assistant coach to John Cooper. You hate to see anybody get fired, but boy, Detroit has just been so disappointing to me this year. I thought that they were going to start knocking on the door this year to get back into the playoffs, and they've been sitting outside the door. They're not knocking on the door. They're just sitting there. So I'm wondering how long Derek Lalonde can be there. Peter Laviolette, that's anybody's guess will go on next to New York. Anyway, let me ask you something, because we talked earlier about Patrick Laine, one of my favorite topics here on the show. And I want to ask you, do you see any downside to Laine scoring 8 goals in his first 10 games since returning, all on the power play, and he's a -7?
Well, and that's exactly the point. And I think, we've had some folks write and say that, we don't know what we're talking about. And specifically you, because you made actually the comment online when the move was made to Montreal. And let's face it, this is a feel-good story in a lot of ways. Unfortunately, he was injured in a preseason game against Toronto and wasn't able to start playing until recently, and he has certainly come out with a lot of adrenaline. He's given some good boost to a Montreal team that is still languishing towards the bottom of the Eastern Conference. But the stats also show something here, that all of his goals, all 8, are on the power play. And the fact that he is still a -7 tells you that he is a liability at 5-on-5. So what we are seeing is certainly a premier sniper, and he is really camped out well in that left dot for those power plays. But what we're seeing is a guy that is, like I said, he's simply one-dimensional. So with that, I will now move on to John Tavares, who is having an outstanding season with the Toronto Maple Leafs in a contract year. And on Monday against Winnipeg, he became the 5th player to score at least 200 goals with 2 different franchises. He had 272 with the New York Islanders and now has 201 with the Maple Leafs. And he joins Wayne Gretzky, Mark Messier, Lanny McDonald, and Keith Tkachuk as the only other players to have accomplished that. So, with that, and with his excellent season this year, what keeps him in Toronto beyond this season?
Him taking the hometown discount. If he wants to take a lower contract and, cut back on some of the money that he makes so that Toronto does have the cap space to sign people like Mitch Marner and others, then he probably will stay in Toronto. I mean, he is a good player. He wasn't drafted first overall for no reason at all. I mean, he's always been a good player his whole career. He's still a good player. He isn't the player that he was when he started with the Islanders, but he is still a really good player, can play and help any team in the league. I know that he wants to stay in Toronto, but I'm sure the economics being what they are to stay in Toronto, he'll have to take a probably much reduced salary. Let me ask you,
going up, right?
Even with the cap going up, yeah, because it's not going up that much that they're going to just have a lot of money to throw around. Vic, can you find a good thing to say about the Islanders' special teams that are both 32nd in the league?
I looked long and hard, and I saw that they only gave up 1 power play goal in 3 chances against last night, and their percentage actually went up. So to kind of give this some scope, last season, their penalty killing was an historic low 71.5%. And that's not Islanders historic, that's league historic. And somehow they have managed to drop 7 percentage points to 64.4, which is, it's almost impossible to be that bad. The power play is at 12%. They've only scored power play goals in 10 out of 35 games. So the silver lining to this, and I think they found it in Toronto in their win on Saturday, it was a penalty-free game. No power plays, no time shorthanded. So maybe that's the way that their numbers cannot get any worse than they are.
If they need to hide the referee's whistle before the game, and if they can do that, then their special teams will be great.
I'm going to ask you this one.
Okay.
Pittsburgh Penguins, 9-3-1 in their last 13. Has this team truly turned its season around, or are they just benefactors of mediocrity in the East?
I don't think they've turned their season around. I don't think they can turn their season around. I think they are benefiting from a lot of mediocrity in the East, and a lot of those bubble teams in the East. There's so many of them. It's more than we can mention off the top of your head. But I think the Penguins are right where they were last year and the year before, and that is right in the mix to say, well, maybe they could grab the last wild card spot, maybe not. They're not as bad as they started the season, but they're not as good as 9-3-1. They still are missing a lot of things. Last night they had to get Bunting to score 2 goals, and that's not going to happen that often. So I think they're the benefactors of a mediocre East and being able to grab some points out of those games. And also having 4 Hall of Famers on your team should win you some games.
Yeah.
Let's move over to the Winnipeg Jets. Probably a team that doesn't get enough credit for their remarkable start to the season this year up to this Christmas break. They are just remarkable with their plus minus and that. 2 of their very best players are Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor, number 55 and number 91. They account for all 5 goals and 8 total points on Monday at Toronto in a very tough game in Toronto that Winnipeg just had their way with the Maple Leafs, albeit Maple Leafs without Auston Matthews. Should these 2 be in the same conversation as McDavid and Draisaitl of Edmonton, McKinnon and Rantanen of Colorado, or the aforementioned Matthews and Nylander or Marner of Toronto? And how about Kucherov and Gunsel and Point on the Tampa Bay Lightning?
I think that these 2 players, their meaning to the Winnipeg Jets is as significant to that club. They may not have the headlines of the players that you had just mentioned. The one thing that concerns me is that Winnipeg may be more dependent on Scheifele and Connor than any of the other combos that you mentioned. And of course, I mean, this is really splitting hairs here because you take any of these players out of the lineup, be McDavid, Draisaitl, McKinnon, Rantanen, Matthews, Nylander, Marner, Kucherov, Gunsel, or Point. Anybody that leaves their lineup, that's going to have an impact. But I'm not certain in the bigger picture Winnipeg would have enough offense to be able to sustain if either of those 2 players went down for an extended period of time.
I think you could be right. I mean, there's no doubt that those 2 players have been phenomenal. And I whenever I see Kyle Connor now, I can't forget that Winnipeg was playing the Rangers and Joe Micheletti said on there, so I'm just repeating what he said, that he knows of a team that decided not to draft Kyle Connor because his neck was too thin. Now, think that one over for a minute.
Well, for the 2 of us here, I got to enjoy doing that segment. Just that, to play Scrooge a little bit here. And, we're 2 grumpy middle-aged guys. And even though...
and middle is being kind.
Well, I'm not going to go there.
Okay.
Maybe people can find our ages on the internet. So, but anyway, just a fun segment to do and kind of a little bit off the beaten path. But before we wrap up here, Neil, NHL schedule resumes on Friday. But before that, the World Junior Championship opens up on Thursday. Canada, the all-time leader in gold with 20. The USA with 6, but since 2010, the United States and Canada with 5 apiece, and I really think that it speaks to just how far U.S. hockey has come really over the last 20, 30, 40 years.
Oh, absolutely. No, there's no doubt, and it's all because we've seen an uptick from so many different things. You can go back to the Miracle on Ice in 1980, which was the impetus to make a lot of American kids start playing hockey. The great stars from United States that we've seen over the past 20, 30 years, like Mike Modano and Pat LaFontaine and others. I'm going to miss a whole bunch if I tried to mention many more. But
Brett Hull, Mike Richter from the World Cup in 1996.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Brian Leach. I mean, you can go on and on. And those have all incentivized other young guys to take up hockey and play hockey. So, USA and Canada having 5 apiece is today's world, much the same as Montreal Canadiens have 24 Stanley Cups.
Yep.
far exceeding anybody else, but they haven't won one since 1993. So, there you have it. I mean, Canada has 20, U.S. has 6, but don't forget that 15 of those were before the modern era. So type thing. And same as with the Montreal Canadiens. So always a great tournament, the World Junior, always a place where you can see these NHL stars of tomorrow. And these kids are really into it, obviously. They give it everything. They've got every shift.
Merry Christmas, pal.
Merry Christmas to you, too. And have a wonderful, wonderful holiday.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. And don't forget to subscribe and spread the word that we are on all podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Spotify, YouTube, and our complete catalog of NHL Wraparound shows can be found on our website, NHLWraparound.com. And also check out some of our shorter clips on X at NHL Wraparound. So, whichever holiday you are celebrating this week, we wish you health, happiness, and look forward to speaking with you on NHL Wraparound next Monday, December 30th, for our final show of 2024.